The Jedi Order spent 1,000 years defining what a perfect master should be, and then failed to notice the one member who actually met every standard they set. Plo Koon held a council seat, commanded armies, used a force ability the Jedi classified as forbidden, and formed bonds deep enough that the clones under him would remember his name decades after he was gone. None of it broke him. Every other council master during the final years of the Republic leaned too far in one direction: compassion into possession, justice into rigidity, conscience into rebellion, and cracked apart when it mattered most. Plo never did, and the reason has less to do with his character than with a contradiction built into the Jedi Code itself. But proving that Plo solved every one of those contradictions requires starting with the moment they reveal the first one, inside a dying escape pod at Abrogado, where the Council had already written him off. In the Abrogado system, where Plo's task force had been hunting a separatist superweapon, he lost his entire fleet in minutes. The Malevolence, a separatist warship carrying an ion cannon the Republic did not yet understand, tore through the Triumphant and left nothing behind but wreckage and a handful of escape pods. Plo reached one of them with Commander Wolf, Sergeant Sinker, and Trooper Boost. The pod had lost its engine, comms, and life support recharge. Grievous deployed pod hunters to end any survivors. The Council refused to send a rescue mission. Mace Windu told Anakin that every battle group would be reassigned to protect supply convoys. Ships could not be spared. Inside that pod, with the air going stale, and droids tearing apart neighboring pods, Wolf asked Plo whether they had a chance. For Plo, survival was not a matter of chance, it was a matter of cooperation. If they worked together, they would stay alive, and someone would find them. He treated Wolf not as a subordinate waiting for orders, but as a partner in keeping everyone alive. When Sinker later expressed the view that nobody would bother rescuing clones because clones were meant to be expendable, Plo answered with 3 words. He told Sinker that clones were not expendable to him. Plo told Wolf directly that he valued his life more than finding the weapon they had been hunting. He said that while stranded in a dying pod, hunted by droids, with no rescue coming. There was no audience, no council chamber, no grand moment, just a dying pod, fading air, and a general telling a clone trooper the Republic had written off that his life was worth more than the mission. Plo's compassion looked obvious in that moment, but compassion alone did not make him different from every other Jedi who fell. Anakin Skywalker felt everything Plo felt. The difference is that Anakin's compassion eventually turned into the weapon that ended the Jedi Order from the inside. After the Council reassigned every available battle group and declared the survivors expendable, Anakin and Ahsoka defied the Order, reached Abrogado on their own, and found Plo and the Wolf Pack still alive inside a failing pod. After the rescue, Wolf told Anakin that Plo had promised someone would come for them. Wolf and the Wolf Pack became known for their devotion to Plo, a bond built on the knowledge that their general would do anything to preserve their lives on the battlefield. The devotion went both directions. Plo risked his life for his clones, and his clones fought harder because of it. Pong Krell showed what the opposite looked like. Krell was one of the Order's most effective generals. The units under his command bled for every win, and on Umbara, he stopped pretending that was accidental. He maneuvered clone squads into firing on each other, and Captain Rex was left to decide whether loyalty to a Jedi general was worth more than the lives of his brothers. Plo and Krell held the same authority over the same kind of soldiers in the same war. Plo used that authority to protect. Krell used it to consume. The Republic's war machine did not care which approach a general chose, but the men inside that machine did. But Plo's compassion looked identical to Anakin's on the surface, and the difference only becomes visible in one specific conversation years later on Felucia. Plo had a personal greeting with Ahsoka. In every appearance where they spoke, he called her Little Soka, a name nobody else in the galaxy used for her. Ahsoka, during the Abrogado rescue, told Anakin that Plo was the person who found her on Sheely, carried her to the Jedi Temple as a child, and then stepped aside without ever claiming the role of her master. He trusted the Order to place her, and the Order gave her to Anakin. Years later, when Trandoshan hunters captured Ahsoka on Felucia, that trust was tested from the other direction. Anakin wanted to tear the galaxy apart searching for her. Plo sat him down and asked him to think instead. He pressed Anakin on Ahsoka's strengths, pointed out that the fearlessness Anakin admired in her could also be a flaw, and told him plainly that if his training had been good enough, Ahsoka would survive on her own and find her way home without anyone rescuing her. Anakin's love always came with a need to control the outcome. When someone he cared about was in danger, he broke rules, defied orders, and threw himself into the crisis because he could not bear the thought of losing someone while standing still. Plo felt the same pull and chose differently. He trusted the people he loved to carry what he had already given them, and he let them. Loving someone without needing to be the one who saved them was the one skill Anakin never developed, and it cost him everything. The difference between healthy compassion and destructive attachment lived in that single conversation on Felucia. But compassion was only the first contradiction the Code demanded every master solve. Plo's relationship with power was even harder to explain, because the ability he used to save a child's life was one the Jedi had classified as evil. If you want to see more videos like this one, a quick subscribe means you will always be the first to know. In a Legends account recorded on the Great Holocron, the Jedi Order's central archive of knowledge, Plo described an incident on the planet Matelos that forced a power out of him he had never sought. A criminal named Dreed Pommel had taken the lives of a child's entire family and was dragging the sole survivor, a 5-year-old girl, towards his ship at Blaster Point. Plo had never trained in Force Lightning, never experimented with it, and never felt drawn to it. Watching Pommel use a child as a shield removed every calculated option, and Plo extended his arm and released 2 bolts of lightning before he consciously decided to. The first bolt dropped Pommel instantly, and the second kept him unconscious long enough for local authorities to take over. Plo later described the entire encounter as one of complete calm, free of anger and free of fear, with full control of his faculties throughout. Even after everything Pommel had just done, Plo was never tempted to deliver a lethal blow. After what Pommel had done to an entire family, and with the sole survivor pressed against him as a shield, a lethal response would have been the simplest option available. Nobody would have questioned lethal force. Plo later chose the harder path, and what makes that choice even more striking is the cultural context. Keldors traditionally saw moral issues in black and white. Their judicial systems advocated executions and punitive amputations. Their default was harsh justice, but Plo deliberately overrode it. When the council questioned him about using a technique they classified as a dark side power, Plo reframed the discussion entirely. He stated that after much meditation, he believed it would be wrong to ignore the ability. Then he told the council that the only person who could rightfully judge whether his actions were correct was a 5-year-old girl named Claria Labrizel, now living with relatives on Matelos. He deflected attention away from the debate about power and towards the life he had saved. He treated the ability as a responsibility, not a weapon. The council debated electric judgment for months. They never removed Plo from his seat, and the assignments they gave him afterwards reveal exactly how deep their trust actually ran. During the Clone Wars, Plo's power kept showing up the same way. Whenever the Order needed someone pulled out of a collapsing situation, Plo was the one the Council sent. He flew the assault that broke through droid defenses over Felucia to rescue Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka from a ground war the Republic was losing. He brought the extraction fleet to the Citadel on Lola Sayu with timing so precise that arriving minutes later would have meant losing Obi-Wan, Anakin, Even Piell, and Tarkin in a single stroke. He reached Vancor just before the bridge of a shattered Star Destroyer collapsed on top of Windu and Skywalker. When the Republic returned to Felucia a second time, Plo designed the strategy himself, splitting forces into 3 squads and taking Wolf's unit over the outpost wall on jetpacks, while Anakin and Ahsoka handle the other 2 approaches. On Korm, fighting Ventress in freezing conditions over Agricid mines, a senior Republic officer was captured mid-operation. Plo refused to abandon either prisoner or the mission and held both together. The Council kept sending Plo into situations where failure meant losing people the Republic could not replace, but the assignment that revealed the most about their trust in him was not a battlefield extraction. It was an intelligence operation so sensitive that getting the answer wrong could have unraveled the entire war. On the moon of Obadiah, Plo found the wreckage of a shuttle and the lightsaber of a Jedi Master who had been lost years earlier, a master whose secret decision to command commissioned the clone army on Kamino had shaped the entire conflict. In the council chamber afterward, Plo noted that Sifo-Dyas had once warned the council about a coming war and the need for an army. Plo then added plainly that it was not the first time the council had been wrong recently. A council member sitting inside the council chamber openly acknowledged that the institution had failed, and then stayed in his seat and kept serving instead of rebelling, resigning, or tearing the Order apart over it, because the Order feared what attachment had done to fallen Jedi in centuries past. It had built strict rules around every demand in the Code, recruiting only infants, severing family bonds before they could form, and labeling entire categories of Force abilities as forbidden for no reason beyond their resemblance to Sith techniques. The institution still trusted him more than it trusted almost anyone else, and the record that earned that trust stretched back years before the Clone Wars, into conflicts the Order rarely discusses. Across Legends comics, Plo's record stretched back years before the Clone Wars. During the Inchori Crisis, he served on one of the largest coordinated Jedi strike teams the Order had assembled in a generation, and throughout the campaign, he consistently placed civilian protection ahead of tactical knowledge. Even after the Republic won, his behavior stayed the same. Years later, during the Stark Hyperspace War, Plo coordinated the Republic's response alongside Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan, Quinlan Vos, Thulm, and Adi Gallia. When the Senate refused to send reinforcements and wrote off the defenders on Oron 3 as expendable, Plo refused to abandon the mission, organized his own reconnaissance, built the final offensive from what he had, and won the war without additional support. His mentor Tyvaka perished during the same conflict. Tyvaka's dying wish was that Plo join the Jedi Council, and the Council honored the request, even though Plo's use of electric judgment months earlier had made some members uneasy. The controversy did not override the trust. When Tyvaka fell, Plo guided the younger Jedi through their grief. He told them that Jedi could acknowledge loss without being ruled by it. Anakin was consumed by grief over his mother. The Council's usual response to loss was to forbid the feeling entirely. Plo did neither. He grieved, and he kept going. Plo's discipline had survived combat and loss. The moment that would expose its real value was not a battle at all, but a crisis where a fellow council member's response would reveal everything wrong with the Order's version of justice. When Boba Fett's vendetta against Mace grew into a standoff with lives on the line, Mace's instinct was to dismiss the situation. He asked Anakin whether he should behave the way a child did, whether he should seek revenge. Plo's instinct was the opposite. He volunteered to go in Mace's place and took Ahsoka with him. On Coruscant's lower levels, Plo turned the mission into the kind of training Ahsoka had never received from Anakin. He taught her patience, listening, and how to disappear into a crowd, while noting that she had inherited most of her master's instincts, including the one that made subtlety nearly impossible. Ahsoka proved him right by drawing her lightsaber in a cantina and blowing her cover within minutes, and Plo's only correction was that her approach had not been very subtle. He still told her the lead she found was genuine. On Florum, walking deliberately into the trap Aurra Sing had laid for them, Plo told Ahsoka to remember patience. When Aurra tried to use her captives as leverage, Plo saw through it immediately and told her she sounded like someone who intended to follow through no matter what he did, delivering the line without raising his voice even slightly. He stayed with his clones when a desperate move against the Malevolence was available. He incapacitated Pommel when ending him permanently would have been easier. He taught younger Jedi to grieve instead of collapsing under the loss of his own mentor. In every case, Plo let his actions carry the lesson instead of his authority. The one quality connecting all of those moments was the discipline to hold back when going further would have been easier and completely justified. The Jedi Code demanded that above almost everything else, and almost no Jedi could sustain it. Restraint at that level does not come naturally, and Plo's origins on Doran explain why he could hold contradictions in balance when every other master eventually broke. In Legends, his home world of Doran was home to the Barando Sages, a Force-sensitive order older than the Jedi's own presence on the planet. The Barando did not treat the dark side as something to fear and wall off. They treated it as a necessary part of the Force, as inseparable from the whole as an ending was from a beginning, and built their entire discipline around the ability to distinguish between darkness and the light without pretending either one could exist alone. They valued patience, observation, and certainty before action. Plo internalized that philosophy before he ever entered the Jedi Temple, and it gave him something most of his fellow masters never had: a framework for holding contradictions in balance instead of trying to exclude one side. The rest of the Order lacked that framework, and the specific contradiction each one could not hold is what ended them. During the Stark Hyperspace War, when Tarkin sealed Mount Avos with enemy soldiers and native creatures still inside, Plo objected. He did not overrule the decision because the mission required completion, but he refused to celebrate or endorse the method. In the council chamber, he told his fellow masters that the council had been wrong before and would be wrong again. When Anakin asked whether Plo had assigned Ahsoka to the Citadel mission, Plo covered for her with a quiet lie, choosing conscience over protocol because punishing her would have served the institution at the expense of justice. Each of those moments required a different kind of balance. Dooku left the Order because he believed he could accomplish more on his own. His intelligence became the engine of his ambition. He took a Sith title, raised an army, and waged a war designed to end the Republic he once served. Plo held the same kind of power Dooku craved. Between his council seat, his battlefield command, and the ability he had already proven he could control, Plo held more than enough leverage to reshape the Order around himself. He never tried. Barriss saw the Order's corruption clearly, but instead of reform, she chose to tear the institution apart from within. Innocent workers were caught inside the temple when she acted, and she let the one person who trusted her the most take blame. Mace followed the code so rigidly that he could not adapt when the moment required flexibility. His decision to execute Palpatine rather than arrest him collapsed the Order's moral authority in a single moment. Yoda sensed the dark side around Palpatine and hesitated until it was too late. For years, the Council debated and deliberated while the trap closed around them. Plo acted consistently and deliberately, but always within the boundaries the institution set. Each of them reached a line they could not hold. Plo never did. Most Jedi are measured by the battles they won. Plo is measured by the people who survived him. He found Ahsoka Tano on Sheely when she was 3 years old and brought her to the Jedi Temple. She became the most significant Jedi legacy in galactic history, surviving Order 66, becoming a key figure in the early rebellion, and practicing a version of the Jedi way that existed outside the traditional Order entirely. When the Council expelled her during the Temple's sabotage investigation, Plo was the one who apologized personally. He called her Little Soka in the council chamber. He was the only master who used her name. Wolf, the clone commander who heard Plo say that clones were not expendable, eventually removed his own inhibitor chip. Wolf survived Order 66 and spent years afterward resisting the Imperial programming that had turned every other clone into a weapon against the Jedi, living proof that telling a soldier he mattered could outlast the institution that said he did not. Sinker made it out of Abrogado and stayed at Plo's side through campaigns on Felucia, a humanitarian mission on Aleen, and the sensitive Obadiah investigation. Even before the Clone Wars, Plo had shaped Jedi who would carry his influence forward. He guided both Obi-Wan and Quinlan Vos through the grief of losing Tyvaka during the Stark Hyperspace War, and the way he taught them to mourn without breaking stayed with Obi-Wan for the rest of his life. Every person Plo shaped outlived him, and only Order 66 made that possible. At Cato Neimoidia, Plo led the 442nd Siege Battalion and Clone Flight Squad 7 to victory over Separatist forces in one of the final battles of the Clone Wars. He was patrolling the bridge cities afterwards when Captain Jag received the order. Jag opened fire on Plo's Delta 7 interceptor without hesitation, and Plo's evasive maneuvers were not enough. His ship struck one of Tarko Say's bridges and broke apart on impact. Most clones carried out Order 66 without anger or fear, and that absence of emotion kept the targeted Jedi from sensing anything wrong until it was already over. The Jedi who spent his career teaching clones that they were individuals was taken down by clones whose individuality had been overwritten by a chip he never knew existed. Barriss Offee's confession remains the clearest internal critique the Order ever received. She said the Jedi had lost their way, become villains, and fallen from the light they once held dear. The Council arrested Barriss, closed the case, and moved on without examining a single word of what she had said. The possibility that her accusation carried truth, that reforms were overdue, that one of their own had already been quietly embodying the solution she was demanding, never entered the discussion. Plo Koon had been demonstrating for decades that a Jedi could fight a war and keep the code. He had spent decades proving that none of the things the Order feared were actually incompatible with the code. Bonds did not have to become possessive. Grief did not have to become paralysis. A Jedi could carry forbidden power, challenge the institution from within, and still serve it faithfully. The rest broke under the weight of at least one. The Order did not need a prophecy, it did not need a chosen one. It needed to study the Keldor sitting 3 seats from Yoda and ask what he was doing differently. In all the years Plo served on that council, surrounded by masters who debated doctrine and feared prophecy and searched endlessly for answers, not one of them ever asked. Plo Koon's starfighter burned against the bridges of Cato Neimoidia, but the Togruta child he had carried out of Sheely years earlier walked away from the burning temple and kept walking. Plo Koon was one of dozens of Jedi taken down in a single afternoon, but Order 66 did not work the same way on every battlefield, and some of the Jedi who survived it did so for reasons the clones never anticipated. So watch this video to find out.